To gaze upon the ruins of the Colosseum or to walk the perfectly paved remnants of the Appian Way is to witness the enduring testament of human ambition. For centuries, the grandeur of Rome has captivated the modern imagination, presenting a facade of pristine marble, unparalleled civic engineering, and the triumphant march of civilization. Yet, beneath the philosophical treatises of Cicero and the monumental architecture of Augustus lies a darker, often unspoken truth. The hidden foundation of Roman power was not merely the discipline of its legions or the brilliance of its jurisprudence. It was an institution of staggering brutality and unimaginable scale, the very lifeblood of this ancient superpower, the silent engine that propelled its unprecedented dominance across the Mediterranean world, was human subjugation. Exploring the true nature of this dominance requires stripping away the romanticized veneer of antiquity. The Roman Empire was, fundamentally and inextricably, a slave society. While servitude existed in nearly all ancient cultures, Roman slavery evolved into something entirely unprecedented in its systemic efficiency and sheer volume. This was not a peripheral practice, it was the structural core of the state. At the heart of this system was the legal concept of chattel slavery, a framework in which human beings were entirely stripped of their personhood, legally classified as property, or res, indistinguishable under the law from cattle, carts, or plows. The explosive growth of this institution was directly tied to the relentless militarism of the Republic. As Roman legions marched outward, conquering the Italian peninsula, shattering the Carthaginian hegemony, and sweeping through Greece and Gaul, they did not merely acquire territory. War was a grand, violent harvest of human capital. Following a victorious campaign, the surviving populations of conquered cities were routinely rounded up, chained, and marched back toward the center of the world. A single military campaign could flood the markets with tens of thousands of captives, transforming the demographics of the Italian peninsula in a matter of decades. At the free port of Delos, a tiny island in the Aegean Sea, the terrifying scale of this human commodification reached its zenith. Historical records suggest that at its peak, the slave markets of Delos could process and sell 10,000 individuals in a single day. Men, women, and children from every corner of the known world were inspected, priced, and sold to the highest bidder. A chalk mark on the feet denoted a captive imported from across the sea, while a placard hung around the neck detailed their physical attributes, skills, and supposed defects. In an instant, a free Celtic warrior, a Greek scholar, or a North African farmer was reduced to an instrument of labor, their past erased, their future entirely dictated by the whim of a master. This massive influx of captive labor catalyzed a profound transformation in the Roman economy and its agricultural landscape. In the early days of the Republic, the backbone of the state was the small, independent citizen farmer. But as wealth from foreign conquests poured into the hands of the patrician elite, they began buying up public lands and bankrupting the small freeholders. These vast, newly consolidated agricultural estates became known as latifundia. To maximize profits, the senatorial class staffed these sprawling plantations almost entirely with enslaved workers, who were cheaper to maintain and easier to exploit than free citizen laborers. The rise of the latifundia triggered catastrophic societal consequences. Driven from their ancestral lands by the sheer economic efficiency of mass forced labor, thousands of displaced Roman citizens flooded into the capital city. They became the capitae censi, the head count, a massive, disenfranchised urban underclass entirely reliant on state-subsidized grain and the political patronage of ambitious generals. The very institution that enriched the elite was simultaneously hollowing out the civic virtue and social stability of the Republic, creating the volatile political conditions that would eventually tear the state apart in a series of devastating civil wars. Beyond the sun-drenched fields of the agricultural estates, the grim reality of forced labor fueled the most grueling sectors of the Roman economy. In the silver mines of Iberia and the gold veins of Dacia, thousands of enslaved men were condemned to the damnati in metallum, a death sentence in all but name. Lowered into toxic, suffocating shafts, they chipped away at the rock in near total darkness, their lives measured in mere months. The staggering wealth extracted from these subterranean hellscapes financed the monumental public works, the sprawling aqueducts, and the glittering temples that defined the imperial capital. Yet the experience of servitude in Rome was not monolithic. It was a complex, multi-layered hierarchy of subjugation. In the urban centers, enslaved individuals performed nearly every conceivable function within society. They were the scribes who recorded the laws, the architects who designed the villas, the physicians who healed the sick, and the tutors who educated the children of the elite. Many of these urban laborers, particularly those of Greek origin, possessed education and specialized skills that far exceeded those of their Roman masters. This proximity to power offered a starkly different existence from the agricultural or mining laborers, but it was a gilded cage. Urban slaves might be granted a peculium, a small allowance of money or property they could manage, sometimes saving enough to eventually purchase their own freedom. The practice of manumission, or the freeing of slaves, was surprisingly common in Rome compared to other ancient societies. However, this was not born of humanitarian idealism. It was a calculated mechanism of control. The distant hope of freedom incentivized obedience and hard work, ensuring the smooth operation of the household while reinforcing the absolute authority of the paterfamilias, the male head of the Roman family. Despite the intricate legal and social mechanisms designed to maintain control, the sheer density of the enslaved population created an atmosphere of perpetual, simmering dread among the ruling class. The Roman elite were acutely aware that they were vastly outnumbered by the people they held in chains. This underlying paranoia was violently validated in the 1st century before the Common Era, when the immense pressure cooker of the slave system finally ruptured. The eruption began in the gladiatorial training grounds of Capua. A Thracian gladiator named Spartacus, trained to kill for the entertainment of the masses, chose instead to turn his weapons against his captors. What began as a desperate breakout by 78 gladiators rapidly metastasized into the Third Servile War, an existential threat that shook the Republic to its very core. As Spartacus and his commanders marched across Italy, tens of thousands of agricultural slaves abandoned the latifundia to join the rebellion, forming a massive, highly motivated army that repeatedly annihilated the legions sent to crush them. For 2 agonizing years, the invincible Roman military machine was humiliated by a force of former captives. The eventual defeat of Spartacus by the legions of Marcus Licinius Crassus was achieved only through overwhelming numbers and ruthless attrition. The retribution that followed was designed to scar the collective psyche of the enslaved population for eternity. 6,000 captured rebels were crucified along the Appian Way, their agonizing deaths serving as a gruesome 100-mile-long billboard advertising the absolute supremacy of the Roman state and the terrifying cost of defiance. The specter of that rebellion haunted the elite for generations. In the aftermath, the state tightened its grip, enacting draconian legislation to ensure absolute submission. The most chilling of these laws dictated that if a master was murdered in his home, every single slave residing under that roof, regardless of their guilt, innocence, or age, was to be executed. The system demanded absolute complicity, weaving a web of terror that bound the enslaved not just to their masters, but to the policing of one another. As the Republic collapsed under the weight of its own internal contradictions, and the empire emerged under the autocratic rule of Augustus, the dynamics of this massive labor system began to shift. The establishment of the Pax Romana, a prolonged period of relative peace and stability, fundamentally altered the economics of human subjugation. The era of rapid, explosive territorial expansion came to an end, and with it, the endless, cheap supply of war captives that had flooded the markets of Delos dried up. This transition revealed the deep, lasting economic impact of a society entirely dependent on forced labor. For centuries, the abundance of disposable human workers had acted as a massive disincentive for technological innovation. While Roman engineers were masters of applied physics, creating sophisticated aqueducts and massive domes, the empire never experienced an industrial revolution. Theoretical knowledge, such as the principles of steam power and advanced water milling, existed in the ancient world. But the economic imperative to develop labor-saving machinery was completely absent when human sweat and muscle could be purchased for a fraction of the cost of developing new technologies. The stagnation of innovation became a critical vulnerability. As the borders of the empire calcified, the price of enslaved laborers skyrocketed. Masters could no longer afford to simply work their captives to death and replace them with fresh spoils of war. The economic realities forced a transition. Estate owners increasingly relied on vernae, slaves born within the household or on the estate. Consequently, the horrific conditions of the agricultural camps marginally improved, not out of a sudden awakening of moral conscience, but out of the cold, calculating necessity of protecting a highly valuable, irreplaceable asset. The tightening labor market initiated a slow, centuries-long metamorphosis of the rural economy. Unable to staff the massive latifundia exclusively with enslaved labor, wealthy landowners began leasing parcels of land to free but desperately poor tenant farmers known as colony. Over generations, as the central authority of the Roman state weakened and the economy faced hyperinflation and crisis, these colony became legally bound to the land they worked. They traded their freedom for the physical protection of the local lord. This profound transformation marked the twilight of classical antiquity. The sharp distinction between the free citizen and the enslaved property began to blur into a new, oppressive hierarchy. The rigid system of chattel slavery that had built the empire was slowly evolving, laying the foundational societal structures of medieval feudalism. The chains of outright ownership were gradually replaced by the invisible bonds of serfdom, a transition that would define the economic landscape of Europe for the next 1,000 years. To look back at the grandeur of the Roman Empire is to confront a profound historical paradox. The laws, the language, the architecture, and the cultural achievements that shaped the trajectory of Western civilization were entirely underwritten by a system of relentless human exploitation. The legacy of Rome is not merely a story of brilliant generals, visionary emperors, and philosophical triumphs. It is equally the story of the millions of nameless individuals whose stolen labor, broken bodies, and silenced voices form the true, hidden foundation upon which the greatest empire of the ancient world was built.